So we today have a lot of films at least clips to show you. So I don't know if we will be able to go to the end of the program, but okay, we'll do our best. But before we start, I would like to just to make a very short point of clarification on the presentation issue. One law asked me to make this clear. I mean the presentation you will have to prepare for the course. Last time I had some hard words on PowerPoint, and I have to make a statement on this. Of course, I did not say that you should not, that you should never use PowerPoint on no account. What I just said is that I'm a bit allergic to it for my own work. But of course, you can do as you like, provided some kind of a, let's say, problematic or a reasoning or an interpretation emerges from your paper. I mean, not just a list of empty headings or chapters. This is what I say. Basically, what you have to grasp is the question, motif, if you prefer, which can go through various films. Or you can as well make some kind of a close-up on one film you're especially interested in. Anything which can be discussed, which will be the matter of the discussion. So I just gave you some examples of such presentation that we had last semester. We had several very interesting presentations on nationalist or post-colonial issues in Kung Fu films from Hong Kong, some Kung Fu films from Hong Kong. This was quite fascinating. Or Julien made a very interesting presentation on beheading, the issue of beheading as a symbol of barbarism or barbarity, that is, the Japanese officer with his sword cutting heads of prisoners, civilians, poor Chinese guys during the war. This was quite a good issue, almost exemplary issue. Or his girls. It's something on self-animalization in Japanese animated films shot during the war. It was very interesting. So you see, this is the kind of issue at least I'm interested in for your presentations. And of course, you have to choose the clips according to the presentation, the clips which fit into the problematic or the question you will be raising. So, if you want, in brief, you have to experiment to try your skill at doing film analysis or something like that, or film critical, both together. I sent to one row a list of films. You got this? Is it available on the
campus?
On campus. So you have this list on campus, about 30 films. But okay, it's not exhaustive. You can choose other films if you prefer something else. Never mind. You can also work on special issue like, let's say, comfort women. In the Japanese Imperial Army, the so-called comfort women issue, which is very sensitive today. And anyway, I will present films and I will raise this issue too, but okay, if you are interested in this, you can. So, comfort women in films, various films, I can give you some indications on this. That's it. And yes, one last thing, the press cuttings. I give you press cuttings almost every week. What is the use of them? Even if they are not directly related to the subject of the day, it means for me that we are not only working, trying to think about the past through cinema, but also on the relation between this past as raised in the films we see and the present and even the future. So this is why I made these press articles in English available. So that was it on this first question. Okay, everything clear? Yes. Okay, so now we have to continue. I remind you briefly what we were talking about. It's about the updating of the image of the Japanese as the total enemy, who basically in the first narrative version, that is in films, in American films shot during the war, is some kind of a beast, monkey, whatever. So the updating of this image of the Japanese as the, so then after the war, in films shot after the war, the former enemy, updating of this image of the Japanese enemy in various films we see how this image or picture, description, depiction of the Japanese as the former enemy is changing and shifting from one angle to another, which is very different. So we just began, we saw a film, clips from a film, which is called Go for Broke, which has been shot in 1951. And we will pass now to our second example, which is Held to Eternity, a film by Phil Carson. You have this, if you kept the paper I gave you last week, you had this at the end of the paper. So, Held to Eternity by Phil Carson, 1960. In this film, a well-known American actor called Jeffrey Hunter has the leading role. Phil Carson is an American director, not the most famous, but okay. He shot different films like Western films, thrillers, war films, adventure films too. So this film, Held to Eternity, it's a biopic from the life of a Marine private whose name, actually his name in reality, real name, was Guy Gabaldon. Guy Gabaldon. And Guy Gabaldon fought heroically during the Battle of Saipan in the Pacific. One thing which is interesting, which is noteworthy, is that this film, you will see in the clips, this film completely eludes the Hispanic, that is Mexican origin of this boy, Gabaldon. This boy who has been raised, we will see this, in a Japanese-American family after having become an orphan from mother and father. And the film transforms this young man into a perfect, I mean, in racial terms, a perfect white man, white with, maybe you have in mind how Jeffrey Hunter as an actor looks like. You will see this in the film. So it's very blue, deep blue eyes. So the Chicano boy is transformed into this electric blue-eyed soldier. And this you can imagine for the sake of, let's say, the clarity or the clearness, not of his skin, but of the political message of the film. Because it seems, and this is the moral of the history, that an American war hero in that context, that is the war in the Pacific, the Battle of Saipan, in such a film, he has to look, let's say, Aryan-like, that is like as Jeffrey Hunter looks like, and this more than, let's say, a mestizo or a Chicano, Hispano-American. Okay. This would be the first remark we can talk about this. So in this film, you will see it works according to what I call a substitution game. A substitution game which consists in putting in the foreground this Japanese-American family which gives the young boy a home and raises him as if he were from the same stock as his new brothers, that is the Japanese sons of these Japanese parents who are Issei, that is people who came from Japan to the United States, the sons then being Nisei, that is American Japanese born in the United States. So in this very warm family environment, Guy Gabaran learns the Japanese language, which is the communication language of the family, of course, and he becomes familiar with Japanese customs. And as the war in the Pacific breaks out after Pearl Harbor, he's of course shocked, you will see this in the film, by the deportation to internment camps of all his relatives, and he asks on this occasion the good question we already heard last week in Go for Broke, that is, why these deportations, these forced internments of Americans from Japanese origin and not the same treatment for American from German or Italian origin. The answer, we saw it last week, is rather obvious, rather evident. But actually, as Guy gets permission to visit his family in the camp before being drafted and sent to the Pacific, it appears that actually these camps are not so terrible. These internment camps are not so terrible, because you will see in the representation of this camp in the film, each family has its own, let's say, wooden small house, like some kind of a cottage, a small cottage. The men are just busy with various occupations. There's nothing like forced labor, so it's all except, let's say, concentration camps, properly speaking. So what we have in this film is a rather moderate picture of this sensitive episode, which contrasts with the much darker picture of the camps, of these camps, you will see later in Alan Parker's film, Come See the Paradise, which was shot in the 90s, later, so in the 90s. But what matters, of course, before all, is that in this film, the dark spot, or the white page of American history during the Second World War, this dark page, concentration camps for American Japanese, this dark spots becomes in this film, it surfaces in this film openly as a collective memory stake, and this for the general public. And what is interesting for us, of course, this through a cinematic, filmic device. So what we are interested in here is cinema as a vector or an agent for collective memory. At this place, we come again upon the issue I raised last time. You can see this in the paper I gave last week. The question of the reverse angle shot. We talked about this. So, because this film completely reverts the picture of the Japanese in general, the Japanese people as a whole, the Japanese as, okay, in the first version of the narrative on the war, things shot during the war. So the Japanese as a violent invader, as an aggressor. This image or this picture having been printed in every American citizen's brain during the years of the war after Pearl Harbor. Because this image is completely reverted, because the Japanese-American family, which is depicted in the film, is constantly associated with positive values like hospitality, generosity. These people, we see how these people welcome, take care of the unfortunate American orphan, white boy, and this in the absence of any kind of obligation for them or any kind of compensation. All the members of this Japanese-American family have a very high moral standard, very high moral quality. The two sons are both exemplary patriots, American soldiers. They will become, after having, they volunteer for the war, on the American side, of course, and they will be very brave soldiers during the campaign in Italy, just like we saw last week in Go for Broke. So you can see from this example how films conflict, different films from different periods can conflict on narrative issues. That is the question of the narration of sensitive past, contentious past. That is, these films basically conflict, films from different generations, conflict on memory stakes. But they conflict in a very special way, which is proper to movie making. That is, they completely ignore a method or device that is familiar to us. I mean, people working in the field of social sciences, philosophy, history, etc. What they completely ignore in the conflict, in the way they conflict, is, let's say, what is familiar to us, open, explicit, well or bad argue, critique, I mean refutation. I don't agree with you and I explain you why. This they do not know. They ignore completely this way of doing things, this way of being part of the conflict, being involved in a memory conflict or in a narrative conflict. Because what they do is just revisiting, they revisit the contentious scene, and they just simply tell the story about it another way, a different way, that is from a different angle, And this is important if we think, let's say, in a bit broader terms, on cinema, on the status of cinema as a manufacturer for narratives. Because we have to remember here that cinema basically, it's an art, but basically, before all, it's a trade. I mean, it's a market. And for this reason, cinema lives the duration or the temporality of cinema. It is basically the present. It's the present, before all. In other words, the most recent narrative, filmic narrative, cinematic narrative of an event, of a past sequence, tends to take the lead from all the others, from all the previous ones. And this, at least provisionally, before another one comes. I mean, the most recent film prints on the public, on the audience, and it is impressive before all as it is released. And I would say this is something the film has in common with the newspaper. This kind of pact or alliance with the immediate present, that is with today. I mean, just to develop this comparison with newspaper, it can be maybe yesterday's paper had a much better construction, more interesting news than today's paper. But in spite of that, what we are interested in is fresh news. That is today's paper, like in the famous Rolling Stones song.
Is this the cinema course? Yes.
Have you got lost?
Yeah. No, we opened the door and thought that this was the previous class. So we were just standing there waiting, and then I thought, that can't be.
It's a pity. So, okay, you have different pages here. This is the way newness is in this space of movie making, newness is constantly rewarded. It's constantly promoted in the development of movie making. And by the same token, this is the way new narratives of the disputed, of the contentious past constantly roll back previous ones, old films. Okay, I close this brief parenthesis and go back to the film. So Guy Gabalon, our hero, is a patriot, but he has good reasons. He has personal reasons to be reluctant to fight against Japanese soldiers, of course, because he was raised in a Japanese family. But as he discovers during the Battle of Saipan how fanatic, how barbarian these Japanese soldiers in the film, in the context of the film, behave, that completely changes his mind. And he becomes himself extremely unhumane. You will see this scene, and going so far as to throw grenades into caves where Japanese women and children have hidden, have taken shelter. And we see in this passage, in this episode, how total war conditions have made of him an extermination machine, reduced him to the condition of an extermination machine, which is completely forgetful of his debt to the Japanese people who raised him. And it will take some time before he pulls himself together and manages. You will see this at the end of the film, and this thanks to his perfect knowledge of Japanese language and culture, he will succeed in this very melodramatic episode to convince a melancholic Japanese general who is played by a very famous Japanese actor, Sesue Hayakawa. I don't know what his Japanese name is. His Chinese name is. But he was made very famous, this actor, by his role in David Lean's film, The Bridge on the River Kwai, where he plays the Japanese owner. So, okay, Guy, in brief, will succeed in convincing this general to surrender, and this in order to avoid a pointless and a new pointless bloodbath. Okay, to finish with a comment on the film before you see the clips. So as to sum up, let's say as a whole, what is at work in this film is not a vehement rebuke of previous versions of Japanese barbarity. It's just, I would say, proper use of one of the properties of movie making. The possibility to invent, to promote a completely new story just by changing the angle of the shooting. For the biographical difference of the hero, that is actually the hero in this kind of film is both the witness, I mean in historical terms, and the narrator. So this biographical difference that is having been raised in this Japanese-American family, that is what makes it possible to relate at this place a completely different story about Japan. I mean, completely different from the story which was narrated by classical war films. The stereotype of the Japanese soldier as a bloodthirsty killer is, yes, it is actually reenacted in this film, as we see an horrified guy watching how his body is slaughtered by a completely amok Japanese officer brandishing his sword. We see this. But even if this stereotype is reenacted, what we see in the film, what the film presents, is that, okay, the reality of the war is more complicated than what the previous film, war films testified about, said about us, narrated us. And even during these scenes, as okay, this wild Japanese soldiers are fighting, we never can forget, of course, the other side of the story, that is Guy's admirable, loving Japanese four-star mother. So, okay, now we can see the clips of the film. So, for those who came late, I remind you we are talking now about a film which is called Hell to Eternity, a film by Phil Carson, which has been shot in 1960, American film, of course. Okay, we have to stop here for this film. I forgot to say that I have to thank Elsa, who put me on the trail of this film. I did not know. Do you have any comment on the film? So now, so it's the first example in this series of film on the image of the Japanese enemy. And now I'm coming to what I mentioned last time under the title of the Japanese girlfriend paradigm. And this will be about a film which is called Midway, a film by Jack Smythe. It was shot in 1976. Midway, as you will see, is a rather luxurious reconstitution of the Battle of Midway, which has been the turning point of the war in the Pacific and the first US victory at sea. It took place in June 42. And as you will see, many international stars have been hired for this big budget production, amongst other Charlton Heston, Henry Fonda, the Japanese ultra star Toshiro Mifune, Glenn Ford, James Cobham, Robert Mitchum, etc. And the interesting thing for our purpose here in this film, it's what I call the plot in the plot. The plot in the plot, that is a love story involving a young American naval aviator ensign Thomas Garth and a Japanese American girl, Hiroko Sakura. You cannot imagine a more conventional name, Hiroko Sakura. A story which is, I would say, like inlaid or set within great history, that is the Battle of Midway. And the intertwining, mixing together of the love story and great history that is of the very small, the infinitesimal and the general. It is not, I think, at this place in this film, it is not just a narrative trick. It is the way the narration of that war is updated, is made standard, that is compatible with present norms and values. I mean, at the time the film was shot in the 70s of last century. And what is meaningful is what we call in French collage. That is the embedding of this minor story in the narration of one of the crucial battles in the Pacific. So now a bit more about the story itself. Ensign's Thomas Garth, father, is a naval aviator too. He's a captain, a patriot, a model officer. And the father of this young guy who is in love with the Japanese girl, the father is shocked as he hears about his son's involvement with this girl, the Japanese girl. But at the time they have a very heated discussion, talk on this matter. The father, the captain, makes things very clear, and this is the important message here. He says to his son, the problem about your love story with this girl, it is not about race, it is about Pearl Harbor. It's about Pearl Harbor. In other words, this love affair for him, it is of course very problematic, but for political reasons, it is not a racial matter. So, if we have this scene in the film, if the father is so insistent on this issue, it shows that there is a problem about it. That is that things have to be made clear, clarified. And this, if possible, once for all. Which means clearly that the ghost of the war of races, the war of races in the Pacific, this ghost has to be dismissed. That is, the image of the Japanese as the incarnation of an evil race. This is the way the Japanese were described in the first generation of the war films on the war in the Pacific. This image of the Japanese, the treacherous Japanese of Pearl Harbor, because of his evil race, this image has to be erased, completely erased, changed, and replaced by another one, or with another one. And then, after this message has been made clear, I think the name can be if you want. That is, the father, the captain, the heroic Navy aviator will go so far in his willingness to show that his objections to his son's affair are not based on racial prejudices. He wants so much to show this, deliver this message, that he will endanger his military career by taking steps so that Miss Hiroko and her family, who have been sent to a detention camp, can be or have to be released. So, we see very clearly, very distinctly here how the, let's say, grandiose reenactment of a historical event is for this filmmaker who shoots his film some decades later, let's say, 3 decades later, it is an opportunity for him to stand back, to take a distance from the original narratives, and of course to improve them according to the patterns and the standards of his time. It's an occasion for him to upgrade the original narratives. And of course, if you know something about Hollywood cinema, you will find that it is somehow ironic experience for us to see how Charlton Heston, who has been for years the president of the National Rifle Association in the United States, that is a very conservative lobby, arms lobby. Of course, it is Charlton Heston, this very distinguished figure of neoconservatism in the United States, who has to incarnate, to embody, and to spread the new humanist enlightened version of this historical sequence. And so, in the film, it appears that this Miss Sakura, the Japanese American girlfriend, and her parents, they are just human beings, and they have been very obviously the victims of a discriminatory treatment. And so they have to be helped and supported according to the new values from the time when the film is shot. They are, as Japanese victims, they become the other of the other, that is the other of the original figure, the Japanese criminal, the Japanese militarist fanatic. But as well, you will see it in the film, as well, all the Japanese military protagonists of the Battle of Midway, that is the command, the high command of the Japanese fleet during this battle. All these people, as Japanese military men, soldiers, they are completely, I would say, redesigned in comparison with the original version of the Japanese beasts of the previous films. Completely redesigned. They have nothing more in common with the bloodthirsty beasts from the previous films, because they are, as Navy officers of high rank, buttoned up, tied in their very elegant black uniforms. You will see. They are just sophisticated strategists. They prepare themselves for the battle. They listen, the high officers listen very carefully to what their subordinates have to say before they take a decision. So this is not at all an authoritarian, some kind of an authoritarian regime or discipline. They weigh up very carefully the pros and the cons before they take a decision. So they very obviously belong to civilized mankind. And okay, what stresses this belonging to civilized mankind is that they speak English in the film. They do speak English with the slight conventional accent, but good English. They speak good English, which is according to this, let's say, grammar or syntax of the film, or this kind of film, a very distinctive mark of belonging to, or being a civilized enemy, not a beast, of course. A beast doesn't speak English. So you will see in Midway, in this film, the scenes where the US Navy high-ranking officers work out their tactics for the coming battle, these scenes in which we see the American officers are perfectly symmetric to those where their Japanese counterparts act or are at work. So you have a game of alternation of the scenes, and we see the former and the latter who are at work preparing the battle, and okay, they are absolutely on the same level. What does it mean? That means that in this narrative, the, let's say, Manichaean tone, good and evil, of the previous films is completely dismissed. It's over. It's no more like this. It shows, the film intends to show through this alternation of scenes that two, let's say, two equally honorable forces are getting ready for the decisive battle. Equally honorable. This is the new narrative. And, okay, what helps? Because these actors have to speak English, even the Japanese actors have to speak English. All those who play the roles of the Japanese Navy officers in the film are Japanese-American actors. So the accent can be okay. Except of course, the inevitable Toshiro Mifune, who was, I remind you, who has been the absolute star of post-war Japanese cinematography, 12 Samurai, etc. So this film shows, I think in a rather exemplary way, how the correction or the improvement, let's say in a bit ironic tone, improvement of the painful past can take place in cinema, let's say, if you take cinema into consideration as a milieu. This way of improving, of correcting, is, I would say, a very relaxed way, a very soft way, very flexible, fluid way. You will not find here, let's say, this kind of dramatic gesture, like tearing pages from textbooks, school textbooks, burning books which have to be forgotten, or banned, which have become incorrect, politically incorrect. You don't have either to forbid to utter the name of a dethroned political leader, nothing of that kind. Just cinema does the job, I would say, does the job, simply does the job, as it is what we should never forget. It's a manufacture, it's a full-time manufacture, it's a plant, it's a factory, and in that case, it's a factory intended for manufacturing historical narratives, memory narratives. So what is the basic gesture of cinema in such a case? It is simply to put old narratives which have become inappropriate, put them to sleep, to lead them out, just to lead them out, to let them fade away, and to replace them with brand new stories, attractive new stories, whose tone has to be in harmony with the present condition, and of course whose charm, whose attractiveness for the audience is that it makes use of the last, the most up-to-date new devices, technical devices. I mean, like special effects in that kind of film. It's full of special effects of all sorts. Because we should never forget that cinema is, par excellence, the realm, the world of constant innovation, like cell phone, exactly same thing. And this, for this reason, for all these reasons, I would say Midway has been, as it was released, it was a hit. And this not only because it's a big show, it's a gigantic war film, but also because it offered the American public first, but the world public after that, because this kind of film is meant for the world public, including Japan, of course. It offered, let's say, an appeased version of this traumatic conflict. It was a very traumatic conflict. Midway also shows, in a very exemplary way, how in the realm of cinema, let's say, rewriting of history, because what is at stake here is rewriting of history, and technological innovation, both, they walk the same step, the same way. They go ahead exactly the same way. So, okay, let's see some extracts, some clips from this film. I will show today, I think. It's called Emperor. It's quite recent. It has been shot 2 years ago by an American filmmaker. His name is Paul Weber. So I will just present it very briefly. You will see that in this film, the Japanese girlfriend, this issue. The Japanese girlfriend, it has become in this film already, it has become some sort of rhetoric trick or rhetoric figure, a narrative trick. It's about at the end of the war, the beginning of the occupation of Japan by the American troops. So it's about a young general, American general, who is called General Bonner-Feller, who is a member of General MacArthur's staff, working in the headquarters in collaboration with General MacArthur. And this military man is a specialist for Japanese matters because he speaks Japanese. And he remembers at the beginning of the occupation of Japan, remembers a love affair he had with a Japanese female student in the United States, and this in the pre-war period, of course. This relation he had with this girl before the war, having become very dramatic because the young woman had to go back to Japan just before the war broke out, and fellows, at that time a student or maybe a younger military man, young officer, who was very much infatuated in this girl, but also as well with Japanese culture in general. Fellows tries, just before the war breaks out, to catch up with her in Tokyo, as the war is imminent, and it's very dramatic. Okay. And some years later, during the war, at the end of the war, he has so has become a member of MacArthur's general staff. He asks for something which is quite impossible. That is, he asked during a meeting of the general staff that the city, this Japanese city, which is called Shizuoka, where he thinks his former lover lives, he asked this city not to be included in the massive bombing program of Japanese cities by American Air Force. And of course, he asked this in vain. So, in this new version, we see that, okay, this motive, the Japanese girlfriend, has already become almost a cliche, a stereotype. But it is also the way, the narrative trick, I would say, through which it is possible for the filmmaker to visit again, to revisit another memory black spot, which is the devastating bombings of dozens of Japanese cities during the last month of the war. That is the extermination of civilians. And this, of course, from the American angle, with full knowledge of what was being done, full knowledge of the facts. Okay, so we'll see in the film, the camera follows General Feller's jeep traveling through the ruins of the razed to the ground city, and some survivors sitting in the rubble, in the ruins, look at him as, okay, he goes his way. And in this context, his girlfriend's, former girlfriend's disappearance, this becomes, at that moment, in this context, symbol of the unprecedented brutality or cruelty of this war and of this chapter of the war, the massive bombings of the Japanese population at the end of the war. And we find in this film the same, what I call the collage effect of the Japanese girlfriend motto, same as in Midway. Because actually the film is it's a film on the haunting questions of the responsibility of the Japanese emperor for the war, which is an issue we will raise a bit later, maybe next week already, I don't know. That is the film, the core of the film, of the plot. It's about how General MacArthur came to the decision to keep the emperor in his position, which was something which came rather late. The Japanese girlfriend, this thread of the Japanese girlfriend, is actually what makes it possible to give the statement, to make the statement quite clear. That is, okay, General MacArthur's decision to meet the emperor instead of having him hung, to spare him, was the right one, was the good one, because basically in the logic of the film, in the narrative logic of the film, this decision not to kill the emperor as a war criminal was, let's say, at the level of the state, of the nation. It was the same, it went the same direction, let's say, as what Fella had constantly fought for, tried to set up at the level of individuals, that is an American-Japanese love story, in spite of the war. So this is the decision, I mean, MacArthur's decision to spare the emperor, not to kill the emperor, is what makes it possible for Japan and the United States to become allies and friends after the war. This is the narrative we have in this film. So it's a moral history, if you like. So okay, it's a very bad film. And it's kitsch, it's very kitsch, you will see. I think it's very kitsch, it's it's difficult to believe. The plot is very weak, but okay, this is not, as we already saw, this is not the main issue for us. Okay, see that? I hope that it's not too long, I don't remember. If it's too long, we will cut. If it's too boring, we will cut. So the beginning, okay, the beginning, Fellows has a Japanese translator, and you will see, he tells him, find the girl, just find her. Okay, this, you see how to turn the enemy into a friend, having a drink with him. That's it, that's the best way. I forgot to say something. It's an American-Japanese co-production, and this is very important. The film, American-Japanese co-production. So you can imagine that the Japanese actors have been selected by the Japanese side of the production for this kind of thing, which is rather new for such a film. Okay, that's all for today, if you don't have questions or remarks. So we have it's going slowly too much. So we have 3 films left on this issue. The Private Navy of the Private Navy of Sergeant O'Farrell. Come See the Paradise. So the Come See the Paradise by Alan Parker is important for the subject, and Letters from Hiroshima by Clint Eastwood. And okay, so it will take some time. Some more time next time to see the clips from this film and have some explanations about them. And then we will we'll switch to completely different subject. So that doesn't get too boring. Okay?